faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today, I'm introducing the book Guishusi, subtitled The Culture of Talented Women in Jiangnan During the Late Ming and Early Qing Dynasties. Before diving into the book, let's journey back to 1618 in Wujian, Jiangsu, for a fascinating glimpse into daily life. One day, after Shen Yichu's husband left for the imperial exams in Nanjing, she felt lonely in her chambers, so she called her friend Wan Qingqing for a spontaneous getaway. To cross-matter Shen Yichu loudly, they headed to a beautiful nearby spot, boating on the lake under a starry, moonlit sky. They anchored the boat, shared drinks, and chatted about their lives. This kind of women's life actually took place 4 centuries ago, in the late Ming period. We often think that ancient women, bound by the three obediences and four virtues, were confined to their inner chambers, restricted and oppressed by feudal traditions. But is that the whole story for Chinese women in history? Today, with Gui Shushi, I'll show you the vibrant lives of talented women in Jiangnan from that era. The title Gui Shusi, Gu is the women's quarters, Shu is a private school, so it means female tutors who educated young women in their chambers. They usually came from educated families, were knowledgeable and refined, but when fortunes fell, they had to teach to survive.
In the late Ming and early Qing, with dynastic shifts and urban growth, many female tutors thrived in Jiannan's elite circles. Poet Yuan Mei wrote in his works about his aunt, tutoring two concubines of a high official.
While titled Gu Shusi, the book covers not just tutors, but also educated women who wrote poetry and painted. Since the 1990s, as feminist ideas grew, more scholars have examined ancient China through women's eyes. And Go Shushi is a landmark in recent women's history studies. The author is Dorothy Ko, a famous sinologist with a PhD in East Asian history from Stanford. She argues that the traditional May 4th perspective on women's history portrays ancient Chinese women as oppressed by feudal patriarchy, forced to adhere strictly to Confucian rules like the three obediences and four virtues, gender separation, and the social gender system. But this distorts not only women's past, but also pre-19th century Chinese society. If women in ancient China were all oppressed, how did the Confucian gender system work so smoothly for centuries? With this question, we'll explore through 4 parts. First, the real lives of talented women in Jiangnan during late Ming and early Qing. We'll start with why that region produced so many accomplished women during that era. And next, we'll examine these women's inner worlds through their commentaries on the Peony Pavilion. Then we'll discuss the expansion of their social roles, and finally explore their vibrant social lives. All right, let's first examine why late Ming and early Qing Jiangnan produced so many talented women. China always had accomplished women throughout history, like Zuo Wenjun from Han Dynasty, Shangguan Wan'er from Tang, and Li Qingzhao from Song. But it wasn't until Ming-Qing period that talented women emerged as a group. Modern bibliographer Hu Wenkai documented over 4,200 female writers in his book, Research on Women's Writings Through History. Among these, pre-Yuan dynasties had only dozens per era, while Ming-Qing period had over 3,900, mostly concentrated in Jiangnan. Why? The author suggests massive silver inflow during mid-late Ming drove economically advanced Jiangnan to transition from agricultural to commercial society, causing 2 major social upheavals. The first major upheaval from commercialization was Great Confusion in social hierarchy. Traditional Confucian hierarchies, like scholar, farmer, artisan, merchant, and gender nobility binaries, suited self-sufficient agricultural societies where everyone kept to their positions. But late Ming, early Qing, Jiangnan became fluid under commercialization, where identities and relationships were situation-dependent rather than fixed. For example, professional artist Wan Duanshu and her husband, born scholar officials, became merchants, selling writings and paintings after family fortunes declined. But this hierarchy disorder didn't fracture society into chaotic free individuals. Instead, people flexibly blended old and new organizational principles to create interest groups for better survival in turbulent times. Thus, social organizations proliferated, with women's awakening consciousness as a shared gender group becoming most significant. Talented women in Jiangnan created their own societies through face-to-face interactions and manuscript exchanges with enthusiasts from different families, cities, and even social statuses. For example, famous talented women Xu Yuan and Lu Qingzi from Suzhou became close friends by exchanging poetry. Later, when Xu Yuan accompanied her husband on long official travels, they maintained contact through poetic exchanges, known at the time as the Wu Gate. The second major change brought by commercialization was promoting a publishing boom. Rising living standards increased cultural consumption needs, bringing rural small landowners, urban small business owners, gentry families, and women into the ranks of readers. Increased market demand led to a surge in book supply and falling prices, sparking an unprecedented publishing boom nationwide. Previously published books were mainly classics, histories, philosophy, calendars, medical texts, etc., with official books printed by the government, known as guankei. But with the expanding readership, people's knowledge needs became increasingly diverse. To meet the publishing and reading needs of different groups, jiake and fankei rose to prominence. Jiake means many upper-class families self-funded printing collections for their children, then gifted them as symbols of family wealth and cultural achievement to strengthen social ties. While turning family cultural assets into prestige and even commercial benefits, jiake also brought culture and learning into the home. Many women from upper-class families began learning to read and write in this atmosphere, with the best among them seen as family pride and receiving support. Publishing works. This practice of integrating women's talents into family cultural capital promoted the legitimacy of women's education. Moreover, the rise of jiaki transformed homes into public activity spaces. Daughters of gentry could enjoy family libraries, watch dramas staged in halls, and interact with visitors from near and far without leaving home. In other words, although gentry women were physically secluded, when a new world approached them, the boundaries of their inner chambers became permeable. Franken mainly refers to numerous private publishing houses that produced books for profit. For profit, Fanka was market-driven, publishing masses of popular novels, practical life guides, and women's poetry collections. The mass publication of women's poetry collections allowed more people to see the market and literary value of women's poetry, inspiring countless women to enter the world of reading and writing. During the Ming and Qing periods, women in Jiangnan participated not only as readers, but also as writers and publishers, promoting the prosperity of the publishing industry. But at the end of this union, the publisher. In conclusion, Jiangnan in the late Ming and early Qing was a rapidly changing world. The development of the commodity economy on one hand brought chaos to the social hierarchy order, and on the other hand, brought prosperity to publishing, objectively giving more women access to education and creating conditions for them to realize their self-worth. It was precisely such a uniquely favorable social environment that nurtured a group of talented women in Jiangnan. All right, next we'll see how these talented women in Jiangnan created a spiritual world far larger than their inner chambers through reading and writing. In the late Ming and early Qing, talented women benefited from the publishing boom, began extensive reading of romantic love, novels, poetry, and dramas, leading to significant changes in their spiritual world. The most notable change was that women became obsessed with love, considering it an indispensable element in life. According to statistical analysis, the work that influenced women the most at the time was Tang Shanju's The Peony Pavilion. Below, we'll look at how reading reshaped their spiritual world through several talented women in Jiangnan who were obsessed with the Peony Pavilion. The heroine of the Peony Pavilion is Du Liniang, the daughter of a local official, well versed in Confucian classics and women's moral teachings. One day, instead of following her teacher's lessons, Du Liniang ran to the garden to enjoy the scenery and fell asleep there. In her dream, she fell in love with a scholar named Lumen Mei, whom she had never met. After waking from the dream, Du Liniang fell ill from lovesickness and died young.
Before her death, she left a self-portrait. Later, in reality, Lu Mengmei coincidentally saw this portrait and fell deeply in love with the girl in the painting. Ultimately, their love brought Du Liniang back to life, and the lovers were united.
In the Peony Pavilion, Tang Shanzu wrote, "Love arises without knowing why, yet it deepens intensely. The living can die for it, the dead can live again. If one cannot die for love while living, or revive for love after death, it is not the ultimate love. This can be said to be the best interpretation of love." The reading of women in the Ming and Qing was not to master Confucian doctrines for imperial exams, more simply to pass time, but mainly to satisfy their own spiritual, cultural, and emotional needs. This reading often bordered on fanaticism. A heroine like Du Liniang, who died for love and was reborn through love, received wild admiration from Jiangnan women, becoming their role model. To them, both talent and virtue were noble pursuits, perfectly compatible with women's traditional role as homemakers. They longed to be as cultivated and passionate as Du Liniang, winning their own beautiful love. Feng Shaoqing, a talented Ming woman, was a devoted fan of the Peony Pavilion. Living secluded by West Lake, she saw Du Liniang as her embodiment, often talking to her reflection by the water. Later, like Du Liniang, she succumbed to depression and died young. Before death, she left a famous quatrain: "Cold rain at dark windows is unbearable to hear. By lamplight, I first read Peony Pavilion. Are there none more lovesick under the sky? Not only Shaoqing has known heartbreak." After her death, male writers created biographies and works about her, turning her into a heroine like Du Liniang. Beyond mere reading, many talented Jiangnan women made compiling and commenting on the Peony Pavilion their life's work. The most typical devoted fans were the three wives of Wu Wushan from Hangzhou. These talented women married the same man, Wu Wushan, at different times, and successively wrote China's first published female literary criticism, Three Wives' Commentary on the Peony Pavilion, celebrated as a beautiful story. This touching story begins with Wu's first fiancé, Chen Tong, who was obsessed with the Peony Pavilion. She proofread day and night, collated different versions, and wrote marginal comments. Perhaps this exhaustive commentary consumed her vitality. She died before marriage. This talented woman passed young. Later, Wu married another Jiangnan talent, Tenzi, equally obsessed with the Peony Pavilion like Chen Tong. After seeing Chen Tong's manuscripts, deeply moved by the comments, she also devoted great energy to annotating the Peony Pavilion. Unfortunately, 3 years later, Tanzei died in childbirth. Over a decade later, Wu married for the third time, again to a Jiangnan talent named Qian Yi. Also a Peony Pavilion enthusiast, she often read through the night, studying both the text and her predecessor's comments, adding her own insights. Later, she convinced her husband to publish their annotated Peony Pavilion under the three wives' names, even selling her jewelry to fund it. Talented women showcased female readers' emotional reflections to society through critiquing the Peony Pavilion, becoming a major force influencing the culture of that time. Beyond reading and critiquing the Peony Pavilion, some fervent fans even designed many family rituals with religious overtones. On altars, they worshipped and burned manuscripts to commemorate the protagonists of the Peony Pavilion, turning reading into a religious act and transforming their lives into a dream world filled with passion. For instance, Qian Yi, Wu Ren's third wife, believed love could bridge the sensible and illusory worlds. After the annotated version of the Peony Pavilion was published, she built an altar in the garden dedicated to Du Linyang and Liu Mei, offering wine and fruits in worship. It's said that on the night after the worship, she dreamed of walking into a garden with her husband and encountering Du Linyang. The rise of educated women and their obsession with love not only reshaped women's spiritual worlds, but also profoundly influenced men's views, leading more men to see women as emotional partners. In the late Ming and early Qing period, harmonious companionate marriages surged, and concubines started being respected as soulmates with elevated status, both results of men seeking intimacy and emotional fulfillment. In this sense, reading and writing made some women's family lives more fulfilling and harmonious. Oh, but these changes didn't pose a significant challenge to the gender-differentiated social system of that era. It wasn't until a group of independent professional women emerged by chance in society that more people began reflecting and revising traditional gender norms. All right, next, we'll explore how talented women in Jiangnan expanded female roles. Traditionally, Chinese women's main duties were supporting husbands and educating children at home. Educated women had great advantages in assisting husbands, managing households, or teaching kids. Therefore, in the marriage market of Jiangnan back then, talented women were highly sought after. Of course, talented women in Jiangnan not only played their traditional roles better, but more importantly, some broke the gender norm of men outside, women inside. Like men, they entered the public sphere and embarked on a path as professional women. At that time, educated, talented women mainly had two career choices. One was serving as gishushi for wealthy families. The other was as professional writers or artists. First, let's look at the first type, professional female gishushi. These female tutors were typically born into educated families that had fallen on hard times, often published poets or recognized painters, responsible for teaching daughters or concubines of high officials as private tutors. They wrote poetry and painted, and since such employments were short-term, these tutors frequently moved around. For example, Heng Wanji from Jiaxing Zhejiang was such a tutor. Born into an educated family, she began reading extensively at a young age and achieved great mastery in calligraphy, painting, poetry, and prose. But in adulthood, her family fortunes declined, and at around 18, she married Yang Shigong, a struggling scholar. After marriage, her husband couldn't support the family, so Hong Yuanji had to sell her poetry, paintings, and calligraphy to make ends meet. She lived by West Lake after marriage, mingling closely with top literati and artists of the time, and her reputation grew. Not only did her works fetch higher prices, but many upper-class noble families also invited her to be a tutor. Later, she mainly made a living this way, and her marital relationship reversed completely. Her husband, Yang Shigong, handled household chores. Yang Shigong managed the housework, prepared paper and ink, and cared for their children. As his wife, Huan Yunji published books, sold paintings, and traveled to teach. Next, let's learn about the second type of professional women, writers and artists. Some talented women from Jiangnan broke into the art world, traditionally dominated by male literati, with their talents. For example, Wan Duanshu mentioned earlier was a prime example. Her father Wang Siren had 8 brothers and was a renowned writer, famous for his profound and humorous essays. From childhood, Long Duanshu learned writing and painting from her father, excelling especially in Han-era rhapsodies and painting, earning even her father's praise. He commented, "Having 8 sons is not as good as having one daughter like her." In 1646, when Qing troops overran Shaoxing, Wang Siren posted a sign on his door, declaring he would never surrender, refuse the Qing's coup order, retreated to the mountains, and starved to death. Her father's integrity and loyalty to the Ming dynasty had a lasting impact on Wang Duanshu. After her father's martyrdom, She wrote numerous biographies for Ming loyalist martyrs. It's said the Qing court invited Wang Duanshu to teach princesses and concubines in the palace, but she refused. After the Ming fell, she and her husband Ding Shengzhao lived secluded in their hometown, Shunyin, with no savings and struggling to get by. Out of necessity, Wang Duanshu had to work as a tutor and professional artist, traveling around to make a living. Her brothers seemed slightly embarrassed by her public exposure and tried to dissuade her. She argued that teaching and writing were her only means to sustain her lifelong passion, meaning she now had to rely on them for survival. As a rare professional woman then, Wang Duanshu sold writings and paintings, maintained wide social connections, controlled family finances, and dominated social interactions. Her husband, Bing Shengzhao, instead became his wife's assistant. Thus, professional women like Huan Yuanji and Wang Duanshu seemed to mock the Confucian doctrine of three obediences. While three obediences enforced strict gender rules, professional women disrupted Confucian identity systems. They weren't just wives or mothers, but held identities unrelated to domestic roles. As writers, painters, or tutors, they became family breadwinners, while husbands lived obediently alongside them. Notably, while they subverted gender roles in practice, they still identified as Confucian women adhering to ethical norms in mindset. So that entering public life to earn through talents was mainly a reluctant move to fulfill family duties. For instance, Wang Duanshu and Huang Yuanji only became writers, painters, and tutors after their families lost livelihoods post-Ming Qing transition. Their successful transitions relied not just on talent, but also on shifting social attitudes. Dorothy Coe notes society's aesthetic and evaluation standards for women had transformed. Standards shifted from three obediences, four virtues, toward virtue, beauty, talent, with male literati accepting and encouraging female literacy. Literate women gained higher value in marriage markets. Female poets, writers, and artists were marketable and celebrated in local histories as symbols of regional prestige. This fertile ground enabled talents like Huang and Wang to overcome barriers into public life. Most Jiangnan talented women came from privilege. While some struggled, many enjoyed poetry gatherings and tranquil lives. All right, next, let's explore the rich social lives of talented women in Jiangnan. With the rise in women's education, more like-minded talented women appeared in the same families and regions. They often gathered to socialize or discuss poetry and literature, forming many women's societies. Dorothy Coe categorized the women's societies at that time into three types. The first is domestic societies, where members are relatives, and their literary activities mainly take place within the family. And this is, for example, after meals, mothers or mothers-in-law would gather with other female relatives to discuss literature. Hearing this, you might recall the scene in Dream of the Red Chamber, where Tan Chun suddenly gets inspired and invites Bao Chai, Dai Yu, and other sisters to form the Crabapple Poetry Society. This isn't just Cao Shui Qin's romantic imagination. At that time, women's circles in upper-class families in Jiangnan were actually very common. The second type is social societies, where members aren't limited to family. Neighbors or distant friends often participate, with a wider reach. For example, in the Poetry Society led by the famous talented woman Shang Jinglan, friends outside the family like Huang Yuanji and Wang Duanshu often exchanged poems. The third type is public societies, with not only broader membership but more importantly widespread publication of works, earning high literary prestige and social fame. The most famous public women's society then was the Jiangnan Poetry Society. They regularly held poetry gatherings on Westlake's pleasure boats, not only finding new self-worth, but also adding charm to Westlake, becoming celebrated literati. In the society, multiple members published their own poetry collections. The 7 most prominent and talented members even earned special, elegant titles called the 7 Masters of Jiangnan. Rather than just wives, or daughters, showing they gained recognition in male society. Of course, this division into three types is just to help us better understand the rich social lives of talented women. In reality, there weren't strict boundaries. When a domestic society gradually absorbs members from outside the family, it becomes a social society. When a social society gains recognition in literati circles or achieves higher social fame through publishing, it becomes a public society. The talented women we discussed earlier were all born into scholarly families as gentlewomen. But in fact, in Jiangnan at that time, there was another unique type of talented woman, the famous courtesans. They were also taught music, chess, calligraphy, and painting from childhood, possessing astonishing literary and artistic cultivation. But their education wasn't for self-improvement. It aimed to please men and meet literati expectations. Late Ming courtesans were socially adept, formed public societies outside families, and many surpassed gentlewomen in fame, Liu Rushi being the most renowned. Not only was she called the foremost of Qinhuai's 8 beauties by poets, but she also excelled in poetry, painting, calligraphy, and even mastered the I Ching. At her peak, Liu Rushi engaged in Jiangnan's thriving literary or political societies, mingling closely with famous poets, artists, officials, and merchants. She later married the literary leader Jian Qianyi in a legendary union. After Qian's death, she urged joint suicide for their Ming loyalty and secretly funded anti-Qing rebels. Truly a heroine. Historian Chen Yin-Kei praised her as a heroic beauty and literary master, even spending 10 years writing her biography. But note, while courtesans' social lives seemed free from feudal restraints, their connections relied entirely on male support, making their circles fluid and their independence weakest. Ultimately, all women's societies thrived mainly because they didn't fundamentally threaten Confucian gender systems. Facing Jiangnan's socioeconomic changes, the traditional gender system showed flexibility. It didn't suppress women's culture, but tacitly allowed new spaces for writing, publishing, and societies. Educated women seized this chance to expand your living space within Confucian limits, enjoying relative freedom. Thus, though excluded from imperial exams, describing Jiangnan women's situation as oppressive is clearly inappropriate. They weren't victims of Confucian culture, but its beneficiaries. Whether gentlewomen or courtesans, they were integral to Confucian society and products of its culture. Finally, let's briefly revisit our opening question. If women in ancient China were universally oppressed, how did the Confucian gender system operate so flexibly and smoothly for so long? Through in-depth study of talented women in Jiangnan during late Ming, early Qing, the author found women faced increasing restrictions like loss of property rights and stricter chastity norms. Yeah. But examining local records, private writings, and novels reveals women's family and social lives weren't oppressed. They were vibrant and free. They could read, socialize, travel, and more. The author argues this paradox stems from Confucian gender norms being constantly reinterpreted in practice, allowing flexibility that prevented excessive suppression. This breathing space enabled the Confucian system's long-term flexible operation. While profoundly insightful, the author's hope to rewrite the victim-centered view of women since May 4th might not fully succeed. The book's focus on Jiannan's elite women leaves their representativeness of broader female experiences debatable. Still, Dorothy Coe's research matters. Studying from women's perspectives lets us hear previously silenced voices. Thus, Chinese history and culture appear transformed. All right, that concludes our interpretation of Dorothy Coe's Teachers of the Inner Chambers. Reading notes are below. See you next time.